Hello, welcome to the Godless Family webcast. I'm your host, Aubrey Adrianson, and with me today is my co-host, Amanda. Say hello, Amanda.
Hi.
And Andy Delude. Say hello, Andy.
Hello.
And Andy is a teacher on a military base. And what I'd like to do is just have Andy tell us a little bit more about herself before we dive into our subject, which is godless military families. So, Andy?
Hi. I am a sixth grade teacher on a military installation. The school itself is a public school, part of the Department of Education in Hawaii, but since it's on base, 100% of our students live on the military base. I am married into the military. My husband is a Navy pilot, and we've been married 7 years now. We got married right after he got out of the Naval Academy, or I'm sorry, graduated from the Naval Academy, and it's been an interesting shift from the public sector or the civilian sector. Because I was in my 30s when I got married, so I lived quite a bit of my adult life in non-military surroundings, and now have spent the past 7 years as a part of the military community. And there's a lot of interesting differences on a lot of levels. I have two children, ages 5 and 10, and they have been raised without any kind of religion. We don't go to any religious services, but they are surrounded by it, so they end up with lots of questions, especially the 10-year-old. The 5-year-old just kind of lives in her own world and does her own thing, but the 10-year-old is pretty aware of what's going on around her, and so she ends up with some very interesting questions. And yeah, so and I've been a self-identified atheist pretty much since I ever learned the word. As soon as I heard the word and found out what the definition was, I was like, hey, yeah, that's what I am. I know it wasn't that other thing. This is what I am.
Great. So I'm really excited to have you on the show because I think you have a unique perspective. You've been in the civilian sector. You are currently in the military sector, and you are an atheist parent. And the first question I have, excuse me, was just to talk about the differences between military and civilian life, and you kind of sort of touched on that a little bit. If you felt like maybe elaborating on the differences, and so for people who don't know, civilians are basically people who are not in the military.
I would say, there's pros and cons to both. One of the biggest things that I've noticed in being part of the military community is there's an instant sense of camaraderie. So, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to live on base. Was when we moved here, my youngest was a baby. She was 1, and my husband was deployable. So that meant he could be spending months away, and we had just moved from my entire support structure. And one of the benefits of living on base is that I would feel completely comfortable going and knocking on any one of my neighbor's doors anytime, day or night, if I had an emergency that I needed. He's gone, I've got maybe a sick kid, or someone I need to take to the hospital, or some other catastrophe happening. I could knock on any door and I know that they would help, because there is that sense of we're in this together, we've got to have each other's backs. And you don't get that in just any neighborhood. And even for families that aren't on base, they know that in that military community, you can, there's like the spouses always have a roster of everyone in the spouses club, and you can call anyone on that roster and know that there is an excellent chance they're going to drop whatever they're doing and come help you if you are in need. And so in that respect, it's an amazing sense of belonging, but with that comes this feeling or this need to fit in. And there is definitely very theistic overtones to a lot of it. One of the things I miss about the civilian life, and I still have civilian ties. I make sure that I get out into into the community and make friends outside of the military. It's a lot easier to find people with similar interests. I'm an avid outdoors person. I love hiking. I love scuba diving, snorkeling. If it's outdoors, I probably do it. And I find that it's easier to find people with similar interests outside of the military. And it's probably because we're ending up in the same types of places that draw us. I am involved in a little game called geocaching, and I've made a lot of my best friends that way because we're doing similar things. We're like-minded, and so we're all drawn to the same types of activities. And you meet, the same faces at a cache over and over again. You're gonna, you get to talking. So I'd say that the sense of instant community in the military sector is amazing, but in the civilian sector, your community may be smaller, but the ties are deeper. So I'd say, not that I don't have some excellent friends that are from the military community, it's just it happens a lot less frequently where I get that deep connection, and it's usually with spouses who are very similar to me, where they didn't grow up with the military. That was the last thing they ever expected to get involved in, and well, the heart wants what the heart wants. Love is love, and we ended up, they're usually the hippie type, or very bohemian, as I often get described as, and so we seek each other out, and it's usually not within the same command, but we find each other. There's some kind of magnetism at work, but that's been, I think, the biggest difference I've seen in terms of just the social constructs. And then there's all the rules and the acronyms. But being in education, I mean, my golly, the acronyms in education and military, I swear there's this unspoken competition between how many phrases can we turn into just a string of letters, and the alphabet soup is insane. But, so the acronyms coming from education, that didn't bother me so much, but having to learn all of them because that's how they speak.
Right.
It's just letters. And so learning where one acronym ended and another began. So it's been an interesting shift, and I find that I will end up talking to people in the civilian sector and use those acronyms, and look at me kind of funny. I'm like, oh yeah, you don't have the dictionary. Let me explain. But I find that when it comes to religion, there's just this overwhelming majority that are Christian is the main one, and what really drove that point home for me was when I started teaching here. There was a parent that came in. It was right before the holidays. They came in to see if there's any work their kid could be doing over the break, and one of the nice things about teaching here is that each holiday or each break that we have comes at the end of a marking period, so there isn't that need to send work home. It's actually a break. I really like it. It's very nice. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, no, there's really nothing. The marking period's over. Just keep reading. That's the important part. Read. And they're like, oh, okay. So are we going to see you at Christmas services? No, my family doesn't celebrate Christmas. Oh, happy Hanukkah.
Of course.
Thank you. Because, that is the only other option. And I just let it go. I didn't feel, because if that was their mindset, I didn't want to, I still had half a year with their child left. I didn't want to create any unnecessary ripples. But it's a very dichotomous kind of, well, if you're not Christian, then you must be Jewish.
Right.
And which kind of puts an interesting group together where you have the agnostics, the atheists, the pagans, and the Muslims all being marginalized together. And there have been, I've had very interesting conversations with Muslim families, and it's, and because being a teacher, that's one of the things that, especially when you're dealing with Ramadan, because we're actually in school for Ramadan, which most mainland schools are not, and the parent will say, oh, well, we're observing Ramadan, and about 6th grade is about the age where they start, they won't fast all day, but they'll try to fast for part of the day, and so it's usually if he starts looking a little peaked, tell him it's okay to eat. I'm like, okay, got it. And so that, so the few times that's happened, I've ended up having conversations with those families, and it's actually easier to identify as atheist to them in the military community than it is to Christians, because there's that sense of, well, you're not the same as us, and so it's created an interesting alliance, kind of. But yeah, there's that very much, well, you're either Christian or you're Jewish. There is no option C, and in a lot of the mindsets. So that's been an interesting thing, because in the civilian sector you don't get that as much, because you're finding people that are similar to you rather than being put together with people. So you're more likely to find people that have a similar mindset.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there and just let our viewers know that I was also in the military, and if we have time, I definitely want to talk about it in regards to the chaplaincy, if we have time to get to that. And I agree with you. There's the instant camaraderie, and this just instantly coming together as a unit that I absolutely loved when I was in. It was even people that you knew on the outside they would never ever be your friend. You could go have a beer with them, and it was comfortable, and you just had enough in common where you could sit and you had things to talk about, and you knew that you had to get along,
Yeah.
especially if you're a combat, right? Especially if you're in a combat unit, that's very important. But my experience is very different from yours in that I was 18, no family.
Yikes.
And so I wasn't. I didn't see as much of the theistic overtones that were definitely there, just because I think those don't really come into play unless you have a family, or they're not as obvious, I think, unless you have a family, or unless you're, like I said, in a unit that could likely see some combat, a combat-ready unit. That's where you're going to see more religion kind of sneaking in. That's where the chaplains like to hang out, and proselytize. So I didn't see it as much, but it was there, and I remember being in basic training, and I was the only atheist in the unit. I had other on my dog tag, just because I was scared to be an atheist at that time, and that was Sundays was the only time that you got a break in basic, and everyone all of a sudden becomes religious in basic training, because you have this break where your drill instructors aren't yelling at you and demanding that you do something 50 million times or do push-ups. You can sit in church and you can relax. And I was the only one that didn't go to church, and everyone was just beside themselves, like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you going to church? And I was like, you guys go ahead. I'm good. I'll be dorm guard. And they thought that I was awesome. Like, I'm staying behind, and I'm like making this great sacrifice so they can all go to church. So yeah, it was definitely there. But like I said, not as obvious to me because I was not in a combat unit, and I didn't have a family, so I was not proselytized to at all.
Yeah, the number of times I've been asked, oh, which vacation Bible school are your children going to?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's a huge thing here. And so they have like numerous sessions if you go to the one on base, or there's the ones off base, and oh, we prefer this one because they do this. And I'm like, we were going to go to science camp. No, I'm taking that week. She's getting her scuba certification that week. Like, just like, no, no, we're good. And so there's that need to explain what we're doing instead, so that I don't come off as a bad parent that we're just sitting at home twiddling our Satanistic thumbs or something. I don't know. But yeah, the number of times every school break I get asked that by somebody else.
Right.
You know, there have been enough, you know, it's enough times that I'm like, yeah, we don't do that. And I just leave it at that. They're like, oh, okay. And I'm trying not to out us, especially my children, because I don't need people trying to save my children for me.
Right.
They are perfectly fine as they are. And my 10-year-old has actually decided to read the Bible so that she can have a sense of what people are talking about, because she will hear, especially when all of her friends are in vacation Bible school, that after that's what they're all talking about. And she's like, yeah, they must be hearing it wrong because it doesn't make any sense. Like, okay. Or it just doesn't make any sense. And so she's reading it herself. I asked a friend of mine who is Christian but is very open-minded, that, you know, and she has all, you know, she had a children's Bible. I was like, can we borrow that? Because my daughter would like to read it, and I want something that is accessible to her. And she's like, oh yeah, actually I have this other one that I like better. Here, and if she has any questions, let me know. I was like, okay, great. And she's one of the few people that I would trust to answer questions without pushing an agenda. So she's one of the more reasonable theists I've run into, where she understands that that's not how I'm raising my kids, but that my kids are some of the better behaved, so it can't be all bad. And so Morgan, my daughter, has asked her a few questions, like, okay, well, they say this. What does that mean? And they'll sit down and they'll have a conversation about it, and she'll give her interpretation, but it's never a, and this is what you should believe. It's always, this is what I believe. This is how I interpret it, and giving that point of view. And then we also have a regular Bible, and she's trying to read that, and she's like, yeah, no, they're hearing it right. It doesn't make any sense. So she was looking at Genesis. She's like, where did all those other people come from? Like, what? Yeah. And so I read it with her. I'm like, yeah, all of a sudden, the one kills the other, and then he's married with kids? Wait a minute. There were 4 people. Then there were 3, and now there's a multitude of spouses from which to choose.
I never understood that either.
Yeah, it makes no sense. I'm like, all right.
So is there a difference?
Go ahead, Amanda.
What are the differences? I've never looked into this, and so I guess it's a little bit off topic, but what are the differences that you would find in a children's Bible? Is just the language different, or do they gloss over any of the destructive violence?
So far, it's a little bit of glossing, where, you know, you might not talk about the bloody foreskins quite as much, but it's more the language, just making it plain English, you know, without the thous and all of that, you know, just making it more like a novel than scripture.
So what about the part like when Lot has sex with both of his daughters? Is that, do they leave anything out?
I haven't looked that part up. I had forgotten about that one. I think they gloss over it a little bit, but it's still there. But I'll have to look specifically for that, because there's been a couple other things that I was like, you know, I specifically looked for, like, all right, how do they cover this?
Yeah.
And it's there, but it reminds me of Anne of Green Gables. And this will be this is the stuff I keep in my head. In the last of the Anne of Green Gables books, she has a kid. And so you're going through, and this is when I put the book down and I was done. And then one night the stork visited, and left a baby on the doorstep. I was like, are you kidding me? I was, I don't know, 13. I'm like, that is so not how that happens, done. And so they handle it kind of like that, where there's a reference to it, but it's so Disney-fied that it's hard to recognize it as what they're talking about.
That I would be really interested to see how that's gone over, even Disney-fied. I mean,
Yeah.
Disney can do some pretty terrible things in their regular movies, but the Bible, I don't even know how they
I'll
explain
have
that
to
to
look
children.
I'd forgotten about
That's horrifying.
that one. So I'll have to look that up.
So we have a question from Keenan, and I don't know if you can answer it, but is there a difference for godless military families overseas versus stateside? So do you know of any differences there?
Hawaii is actually considered an overseas post, even though it's U.S. soil, just because a lot of the components of moving here and living here are similar to being abroad. I think the main difference is that because you are so separated from your support system, that it is so hard to get back and see family, that your military community kind of fills in when it comes to religion where your family would have been. And so it becomes even more important to have people of the same religion, so that, you know, when you're the confirmation, I think that's the one that they do after catechism, I think.
The Catholics, yeah, I think so.
So if you're 5,000 miles and $6,000 away from family, and you're your child is doing confirmation, it's important to have people there for it. It's a rite of passage. It's a big deal, and so having your military family there is important. And I know this because I've been invited to a few, and it gets interesting. And I've been to one because they were very good friends and had done a lot for, they'd been there for my family when we needed someone, and so it was a show of support. And I think I managed to keep from rolling my eyes too much. But the military family really does step in, and that's one of the nice things about the military community is they will fill those gaps that you have because you're so far away from your support system. Now, if you're stateside, it's probably easier for your family to make it to events like that, or for you to make it home. So it becomes I think it becomes less of an issue. There's also one of my children is very upset. This morning she was crying over tying shoes, so it could be nothing.
Oh, if you have to go check, that's okay.
Oh, yeah, she's crying over shoes again. It came untied, and so yeah. But I think on the state side of it, so many of the military bases are in the Bible Belt that there's a very similar vibe. I mean, we were in Texas for part of one of our tours, and just the overwhelming religious feel of that area, and then to have it kind of condensed and boiled down so it was even thicker in the military community was kind of interesting, which is where my youngest was born. And so yeah, there were lots of people asking about the baptism, and like, oh well, we're moving before then. We've got too much going on right now. We're gonna, so we're moving, and there won't be a baptism here or anywhere.
So are you the only person in your circle who identifies as an atheist or an agnostic?
In our current command, as far as I know, I am.
Okay.
In our previous command, there was one other family that identified as agnostic, and I'm still in touch with her, and so we hang out frequently, and so it's nice to have a place where you can go, and God isn't being thanked for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm hanging out with her and then I go and hang out with other friends, that's when that difference, because everything's, well, thank God that this happened, and thank God that that happened. Like, okay, and it gets to a point where I kind of tune it out, and it's just, we're thankful that something worked out the way it did. But then when I'm at her house or she's at mine, it's nice that that isn't, and it's like, well, thankfully, he came to his senses and decided that the toy potty was not the place to pee. And it's nice to have that break. But yeah, I mean, it's few and far between, that's for sure.
When I was the only atheist that I knew of, but I was also in hiding. Like I said, other religion was on my dog tags, and officially on my record, and I came out to a few select people. So I didn't knowingly know any other atheists. It's interesting though, because now that I'm, since I've been out for 20 years, I meet people here and there that have been in and that are atheists and were atheists at the time. So I definitely think a lot of us are still hiding.
Yeah. Well, I had come out to a friend of mine, and because I had apparently completely misread her, but she kept making references to things, and I was kind of like, okay, well, that's not really my thing. She goes, well, what do you mean that's not your thing? Well, I'm not Christian, and some people will leave it at that. They're like, oh, okay, because they'll fill in the blank on their own, usually with Jewish, but okay. And the cheeseburger in my hand would probably suggest maybe not, but but she's like, oh, so what are you? Like, I'm atheist. Oh, so what do you believe in? Not much. I have confidence in things, and ever since that point, she will make references to my atheism as this thing I'm overcoming, and
wow,
it's great. And I can tell she watches a lot of Bill O'Reilly.
Oh.
The little snippets that I see on The Daily Show, she will end up quoting or referencing or positing as her own point of view. And my favorite was when she said, I had wished somebody happy holidays, and she goes, well, you need to say Merry Christmas, because Christmas is the only holiday in December. I said, that is bull, and I listed like 3 others, and she's like, oh. I was like, and I will fight to the death for my right to celebrate solstice, just like I'll fight to the death for your right to celebrate Christmas, and it's happy holidays. And she's like, oh, well, I forgot about those. I was like, it doesn't make it any less real.
Right.
And so one of the whole like morality issue, because she and I have talked about that, because she's one, oh, the 10 Commandments should be in schools. Okay, and we'll put it right next to the 5 pillars of the Islam faith and everything from the Vedas. I don't have enough wall space for that. And we'll need the Eightfold Path and the 4 truths. And I started listing all of these moral constructs, and she's like, well, it doesn't really matter which one it is, but religion is the only way to have morals.
Oh boy.
No, I'm a pretty moral person. I have never killed anyone. I don't steal. I am, honest and forthright. And then a couple days later, it came up that I am boycotting Papa John's. There's elements of their corporate model that I don't like. I don't think they are treating their employees fairly. And, for its faults, the Affordable Care Act is bringing good things to a lot of people, and the CEOs, and I'm not going to get on this soapbox right now, but the CEO's policy to try and buck the system doesn't sit well with me. And so I refused to buy pizzas from Papa John's. And so we were talking about doing some kind of pizza thing. I was like, okay, well, I'll go over to Bob's Pizza, which is best pizza on the island, And she's like, oh, we'll just have Papa John's deliver. I'm not paying for it then. What? Like, I am boycotting Papa John's. I don't like their corporate model. I think they're doing a disservice to their employees. She, and this has been 3 months now, makes fun of me for boycotting them and standing and making a stand for my morals every chance she gets. And well, you know, she's like, well, I'm going to bring Papa John's in for the class. I'd really rather you didn't. It's your money, but I'd really rather you didn't. And oh well, I'm gonna corrupt you one of these days.
Why would that be somebody's goal? That's kind of sad that
Yeah.
she wants to corrupt you to something that you feel strongly about. I mean, especially.
But I'm the immoral one because I'm an atheist.
Right, exactly.
Like, how does this work? No, I don't think so.
So you've touched on these two questions a little bit already, but I do want to ask them and see if there's anything you want to add.
Okay.
What are the consequences of being a non-believer in the military, so a military member? And then the follow-up to that is what does that mean for non-believing families, so the civilian dependents? So you've actually kind of talked around those a lot already, so I thought I'd just throw them out there and see if there's anything else you wanted to add.
I'd say one of the biggest consequences, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking before about the chaplains, is being a non-believer kind of cuts off one of the biggest benefits there are to being in the military. That having chaplains, it's a confidential place to go for support, moral support, resource support. They know they have access to so much information, and I know on my side, there have been a few struggles that we've gone through. I mean, every military family does. Every family does, and the military just adds a couple more things on top of that. And there have been times when it would have been nice to be able to go to my command's chaplain to get an idea of other resources, to get the moral support and have it be confidential, have it not show up on my husband's service record, and to find out what other options there are to, work through this current struggle, which really has nothing to do with him, but to do with, being in the military, and I don't want it to reflect poorly on him that, I'm a little stressed out right now. Mm-hmm. And being a non-believer, I did not go to the chaplain. I did not know him well enough to know if he was going to tell me to turn to prayer, or I've heard so many stories about from believers. Yes, the chaplain was so great, and then we prayed on it. I want something real. I want a real resource that's going to actually solve my problem, and I don't want to have to lie. And like I said, I'm a fairly honest person. I will evade the truth, but I don't want to sit there and pretend to do something I'm not actually doing. I feel that's not doing anybody any service. And so I've had to find other resources which did not help the stress level, because I didn't feel that I could go to the chaplain and have my lack of belief be respected.
Right. So for people who don't know, I just wanted to kind of throw in there, if you're a military member and you're having any kind of emotional, mental health problems, you have two choices. Well, three choices. Well, four. You could not do anything about it at all. You can go to the chaplain, and that's confidential. Like none of that information that you tell the chaplain goes on your military record at all. You can go to the base psychologist, which is 100% not confidential, and everything you say goes on your military record. Or you can go off base to a psychologist and hope that nobody finds out, because once they find out, then those records can then be brought in to your military record.
And you have to pay out of pocket because you can't use your insurance, because then it gets reported back to command.
Right, right.
And yeah, so really the chaplains are the only ones you can go to for that initial step. And if it needs to go further, then that's fine. Seeking out the psychologist on your own terms is better than being commanded to go see the psychologist, that's for sure. But it's a good first step to, kind of really assess how much trouble you're actually in and find out what other, because there's tons of resources out there that are confidential, but you kind of have to know where to look.
Yep.
And some of them are by referral, or there's certain key phrases you are not supposed to use, and because if you use this key phrase, well, that gets jumped right over to command. But if you say this, then you're fine. Mm-hmm. And it's that secret decoder ring that didn't
the chaplains have.
And
the chaplains have a tremendous amount of clout on the base as well. They can talk to you. They can talk to your commander on your behalf. They can get resources for you.
Yep.
They have funds, I believe, that they can allocate for certain things. So it's a tremendously powerful organization in the military, but it's only for people who have religion. So I think it's an empty space for secular military members and their families.
I think having a secular, atheist, humanist, whatever chaplain, and I was so upset when that didn't go through. I think that would be a tremendous resource because it's that confidentiality, and it's someone who's going to give you the tools that fit for you. If praying, if for theists, praying helps them solve their problem because they're focusing that inner energy on solving it, fantastic. I'm very happy for them. I want something that's going to work for me. Mm-hmm. There's an excellent chance I've already thought deeply about the topic, and that hasn't fixed the problem. And I was reading one of the blogs that was talking about what's his face, Perkins, and saying, oh well, an atheist chaplain is that's no comfort in a time of need, because they're gonna, especially if it's informing a spouse of their spouse, the active duty member dying. Well, the atheist chaplain is just going to say, well, they're worm food.
That. Yes.
Sure, that's
not what they're going to say.
And I would rather, and actually, I think I would find it kind of funny, like, if done in the right way, sometimes when you're grieving or you're really upset, a little laugh goes a long way to moving in the right direction. But, that I am a little twisted that way, so I don't know. But,
I value honesty,
Yeah, and I don't want, and I've thought a lot about this because my husband's gone right now, and he's gone a lot, but it's, if they had to come to my door to give me that news, would I rather have someone, and we'll go with the absolutely absurd extreme of he's just going to sit there and say, yeah, well, he's swimming with the fishes now. Would I prefer that, or he's in a better place? And honestly, I prefer to know that he's giving back to the circle of life.
Right.
And not that it's going to make me feel better about, the love of my life no longer being a part of it, but I'm going to get more comfort from someone that has a similar worldview than I am from someone who is going to keep me in their prayers. Mm-hmm. And their prayers aren't going to fix, the ache in my heart, or having to tell my children, or finding my way in the world from that point on. Mm-hmm. And having someone that says, okay, well, here are these resources, and if you need to talk, here I am, and not rely on some faith in an afterlife. Oh, well, you'll rejoin him someday. No, I'm going to become worm food too. That's what's going to happen. And so I'd rather have a realistic conversation with somebody and have real healing happen sooner than empty words that mean nothing to me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I'd rather have the crafts than the line.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today now that since we're on the issue of the chaplain and the chaplaincy, I did want to talk about my own story in the military. I joined when I was 17 and left when I was 18 because I had some health problems. And I wanted to talk about that in relation to the chaplaincy because I firmly believe that if I had a chaplain supporting me at that time, that I would have completed my 4 years, my 4-year obligation. So the end result was I needed to have sinus surgery, and it was a very minor surgery. I ended up getting it when I was, gosh, how old was I? 28, 29, something like that. And it was I was in the hospital for half a day. I mean, that's how minor the surgery was. But it took a long time to find the problem because what happened was I wasn't sleeping very well. I was sleeping terribly. And so during the day I was falling asleep a lot. And when I turned 18 is when it really started becoming a huge problem for me. I could fall asleep mid-sentence. That's how sleep deprived I was. And this was at the end of the first Iraqi war, so this was 1995. And Bill Clinton was downsizing, the military bases were closing. And I remember talking to my commander about what was happening, and I had gone to the doctor. They had done x-rays, which was apparently the wrong thing to do because it was a CT scan that actually found the sinus issue. And I was telling her that my doctor said that the next step should be a sleep study. And I remember my commander telling me that they weren't going to waste the time and resources on a sleep study for me, that there were more important military members out there to do sleep studies on, and I just wasn't worth the money anymore. I wasn't worth the time and energy anymore, despite the fact that I had been in 8 months and they had spent thousands upon thousands of dollars on my training, which I was almost done with. They weren't going to do a sleep study. And there was nobody for me to talk to. There was no chaplain. What is a psychologist going to do? A psychologist just takes notes and makes a report. They can't advocate for you. So I left. I left 8 months in, and it was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made in my life because I actually really loved the military and I didn't want to leave. I was going to be a lifer. That was my plan. And I spent the next 3 years basically wandering around the United States trying to figure out what the hell am I going to do with my life because it was basically destroyed with this commander that didn't want to help me. And I just think back to that, I think if only I had a chaplain, if only I had someone to talk to, someone to advocate for me, someone to say, yes, you need to do this sleep study or you need to do more studies. This is, someone with a perfect service record so far, someone who wants to be here, someone who's highly intelligent. Why wouldn't you help this person? And so I just wanted to talk about that because every time someone brings up the chaplaincy, I think about that time in my life where if there was just someone I could go to help me, I think I would have at least fulfilled my 4 years. And go ahead.
Even if they decided not to go ahead with the sleep study, you had someone in your corner saying that this person is worth it.
Right.
And that positive influence. So even if the end result was the same in terms of timeline, the inner feelings would have been different.
Mm-hmm.
That feeling valued.
Right.
Because that goes such a long way to everything else. If you feel that you're validated and valued, it changes your outlook.
Yeah, and it was just interesting to me that there were people that were just doing all kinds of things to get out, and it was just easy to get rid of people. And here I am, I want to stay, and she just didn't want to have anything to do with me. And an interesting twist to that story I found out later in a separate conversation I was having with her. I was expressing my discontent that I was leaving, and that I was upset about it, and she said to me, something like, "What are you complaining about? You're getting an honorable." And I found out later, that she had actually gotten in trouble because she was trying to give me a general discharge, and the colonel on the base found out about it and made her change it to an honorable.
Wow.
So that's really interesting. I definitely had an enemy there with her. She did not like me, and I don't know why.
Wow.
So I'm a big advocate for the chaplaincy, because I do think that they advocate on your behalf. They get you resources, and then, like you were saying, if you ever had to deal with the death of a loved one, at least you're having someone to talk to you that shares your worldview. And I feel like it's discrimination to atheists, humanists, agnostics, that they don't have this resource available to them.
Yeah, and people, one of the when there was that big argument on Twitter, when this was all going, and I was actively watching and jumping in there every once in a while, just how, well, you can still go to the chaplain. Yeah, but how do you know which one you can go to? How do you know, it's not going to all end in a prayer session, and that they're going to tell you you just need to go to church more? And, I don't, if I'm dealing with a personal crisis, whatever it is, the last thing I need to is then defend my lack of belief.
Right.
That's something that's the one thing I'm good with. I don't, if I'm going through a struggle, I don't need to then get into a debate as to whether or not there is a God or whether or not I should believe. And if some of their resources, and I have known chaplains that their first suggestion is prayer and, some kind of, we'll go to the prayer circle or do this or that, like, it's all, the first line is religious. And if that doesn't work, then I have these other resources that we can try. But I've also known chaplains that it's kind of the reverse. It's, we'll start with these other resources, and I'll keep you in my prayers. Mm-hmm. Or but how do you don't know who you can turn to, and the chaplain you're supposed to go to first is your command chaplain. And it's not somebody I know. I don't know if that's someone that I can turn to in a time of crisis and be given real tools. My husband has dealt with a few of them, and he's like, yeah, well, there's some really good ones. I'm like, okay, there's a good chance if I want to go talk to one of these people, it's not something I want to go through you to do. If I've got something going on in my own head that I need to get straightened out, I may not want you in on the ground floor of that. There may be something I need to figure out on my own so I can figure out how to bring you in. And that kind of floored him, that I might have stuff going on in my head that he wasn't a part of. What? Because, the universe revolves around him. And so, yeah, he's saying that, oh, yeah, there are some really good ones out there. I'm like, yeah, but I don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. And, it's the military. It changes all the time. You may tell me this one guy is really great, and it's his last month. It's a constantly changing landscape. And so if we had a secular chaplain, if we had that office, then I would know that whoever was in it was going to support my worldview. Mm-hmm. And that would be a safe place to go. So it just, yeah. So we have about 10 minutes left, and the last question is the big question. So how can we help non-believing military members and their families? And I see this attacking this question from two different angles. How can service members help service members, and then how can people in the civilian world support godless military members and their families? Any thoughts? I think the biggest thing, and I've seen this at work in the school where I teach, is making the resources available, so that those resources that the chaplains would guide guide service members and their families to, making those available without having to go through the intermediary. And the school has been really good about that because we've got all these different programs on campus and we're able to refer families to them. So if we know that there's something going on, oh, hey, I've got 10 more minutes. Yes. Dying of starvation out there, apparently. They absolutely had to have popcorn. But we're able to make those resources available to the families, and we're in that unique position of being a 100% military school, even though we're part of the DOE, and families that go off base for school don't have that same access to those programs. So it's kind of removing that middleman, making the chaplains a non-necessary player. So making making it more transparent of where you can go for the help you need, because it seems like there's kind of those levels that you have to go through in order to find them. But then and that's kind of the service member to service member. So if you know that, oh, if you need this resource, this is the group to go to. If you need that resource, that's the one to go to. In terms of the civilian sector supporting non-believers in the military sector, that's a harder part because it's how do you advertise without bringing heat down upon yourself, kind of, becoming one of those resources, having groups, and I think the Foundation for Religious Freedom, which is a group that I actually turned to for an issue I was having, just because I wanted to know what the law was behind. I was like, I know this is not right, but I want to know exactly why. Mm-hmm. And they were able to give me some great resources. So having groups like that, having groups like American Atheists, the Military Religious Freedom Foundation, that's a great one. And so there are growing resources out there as it becomes a legitimate, or not a legitimate need, but a growing need and a more recognized need. So legitimized, I guess would be the word I was looking for. So just making sure that those resources get more play, are out there more. It's easier to find them. And I think social media is a huge vehicle for that. So.
Okay, great. And then the only other thing that I could think of, and I'm probably beating a dead horse by now with this, is getting a humanist chaplain in, and that does come from the civilian end. That comes from Congress. Yep. Getting that voted in.
Yeah. So just advocating for that, just having everybody advocate for that, and I guess the issue is the terminology, and chaplain necessitates religion. Well, definitions change.
Right.
And teacher used to necessitate female. It doesn't anymore. Just scientist used to necessitate male. It doesn't anymore. So and granted, religious to not religious is kind of almost a bigger shift from gender specification, but it just having that be a dialogue that keeps happening. Mm-hmm. And again,
all we're talking about is a name change. I mean, come on. Yeah, it's if you look at the chaplaincy, you're very clearly discriminating against a group of people. Yeah. So if all they have to do is change the name of it, then I think that's what they need to do. So.
Or slightly alter the definition of it.
Right.
I mean, either one would perform the same service, and it's such a great resource, and so little of it actually has to do with religion. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So little of what they do is actually performing religious service. And so it would, yeah, it would be better almost to create a whole new thing and say, oh, some of them can perform these religious services as well.
Right.
And the thing is that for most religious services, there is some kind of secular counterpart. I mean, atheists get married, you know, and so it seems like that would be an add-on to a different service rather than needing to completely redefine the current one.
Right.
But really, I'd be happy with either one. I have no problem with the word chaplain.
Right.
And
I like that you mentioned the supporting the outside groups like American Atheists and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. They are a great resource. In fact, this will come up later. Towards fall, I plan on contacting the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and I am going to be sending a letter to my child's school, and I want to make sure that I have my laws correct. They do, and I've complained about this a lot, they do a holiday boutique at my children's school where they leave their classes. This happens during class time, so that they can go holiday shopping.
Gotcha.
At my child's school. So it's really been pissing me off. So I'm finally going to write a letter, and I'm going to be just contacting them and making sure I have all my I's dotted and my T's crossed before I send it out. So,
and that's what I had a very similar issue with my daughter's teacher, who was making religious references in class all the time, referring to everybody as all of God's children, telling them to be quiet like in church, which the first time he said that, she came home, she's like, how quiet is it in church? Like, it's very quiet. Oh, so I should stop talking when he says that. Like, or he could just ask you to be quiet.
Right.
I mean, that would be the more direct route. And as we got closer to the holidays, these references kept coming up, and she was feeling very uncomfortable, and she's like, I don't want to know what happens when it's actually winter break, and if we're going to be doing any kind of. She had a legitimate concern that there was going to be actual Christmas activities, and she's like, I don't want to do that. And so I ended up talking to the administration because I didn't want to go directly to him because, well, that's not very, that doesn't solve the problem. That makes it worse. And so, and I contacted Freedom from Religion Foundation to, all right, what is the law on what public schools can and cannot do? Because I was pretty sure I knew what it was, but I wanted the actual, so if it came to that, I could be like, well, here, this is what the Constitution says. This is what the law is, and we need to honor that. And they gave me some really great resources. So it was nice to have that in my back pocket. I never needed to use it. The admin was very wonderful about the whole thing, and it got better for a while. And apparently, it's been resurfacing now. But we're 4 weeks from the end of the school year, with no big religious holidays in front of us. So she's like, I can suck it up for a month. Right. I appreciate that. Next year, actually all three sixth grade teachers are, I'm atheist, one is agnostic, and one is kind of Catholic sometimes. She's high holidays. But other than that, there isn't a whole lot. Fifth grade team, oh my gosh, it's one teacher runs the school's prayer circle that happens before school. One teacher is a Mormon, and the other one is my daughter's teacher. And they are the lunchroom when they're in there gets interesting for me because the Joel Osteen. Right about the time there was a whole bunch of stuff, in all of the atheist groups about the ridiculousness coming from him. In the lunchroom, he was being lauded as this wonderful voice of reason.
Oh, boy.
Like, I'm going to go eat in my classroom now. Thank you. And, there were a couple times where I had to bite my tongue to keep from being like, are you kidding me?
That would be tough, yeah.
Yeah, it gets interesting.
So it sounds like if there isn't legislation to support humanist chaplains, kind of like you said before, Andy, the Freedom from Religion Foundation is a great resource, because a lot of times, looking online is going to be your best bet if you aren't comfortable going to a psychologist or a counselor outside of the base. I also found, I think you had mentioned American Atheists. They have a very small, it's kind of depressing how small it is, but it's a small blurb on military atheists. But they do have a person that you can contact if you need more resources. His name is Thomas Faulkner, and they have his email address on there. If you just go to atheists.org, there is a military area under that, as well as the Military Association of Atheists and Freethinkers, which is an even bigger resource that people can go to, and that's militaryatheists.org. And so that has a lot of resources, a lot of news stories, and people that you can talk to if you need to bring the laws into your commanders to make sure that you know your rights. So those are some great resources as well if you have to kind of turn inward to find help.
That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, the more resources we get like that available, the better. And then, and if there are people in those groups, because I think American Atheists has a military, I can't remember what the, not liaison, but someone in the administration of, I think that's the right word for it. My school references, but in the administration of American Atheists that is a military member, having people like that can then say, okay, well, you may not be aware, but there's Project Assist that could help you with that, or there's EPIC, and these are all acronyms, of course. EPIC can help. Oh, for that you might want to check out Navy Marine Corps Relief Society. And so having that connection of, and having to go outside of the military to then be directed back into it is kind of asinine, but it is what it is. But having those people in atheist groups, you're going to be directed to solid resources that are not religious based.
Right, and we'll get those links up too, Amanda. I'll get those links up to those places, because those sound like great resources. I know I have at least one of those up already. I didn't know about the American Atheist one, and that sounds like a really good one. So we'll get that up for people. Any closing remarks or anything else that you want to talk about, Andy? Our time is pretty much up, and I know you've got some starving girls there.
I command to be fed regularly. I had no idea. I think one of the biggest things that has helped me is actually Twitter, and finding all of these awesome atheists out on Twitter all over the world, and hearing or reading things that reflect my mindset. And no, we don't agree on every single thing, but that's going to be impossible. We're humans. But seeing that as a nice antithesis to what I see in my everyday life, and some of the more narrow-minded or rigid thinking that I am subjected to. It's nice to have that counterbalance. And so, yeah, my Twitter feed is, I'd say, 99% atheist and 1% geocaching. It's nice to get, so when I'm getting a little overwhelmed with the theism that I, live in the middle of, it's nice to have Twitter to escape to and kind of get that balance of reason in there. So having those resources, just like we were talking about before, that validation of, no, I'm not the only one that thinks this. Mm-hmm. I'm not the only one who feels this. And, oh, hey, that's a really good argument. I'm going to have to remember that for the next time that comes up. And which is where I got in my whole list of December holidays. I knew a couple off the top of my head, but I just read, somebody's, and here are all the other December holidays. And that was the list I rattled off. I was like, because someone put the time in to look that up. So having those resources has been invaluable to me, and reading how other people are handling the issues of religion with their kids has helped me. I also have, my girls are very independent, sometimes a little too independent, and they really do think for themselves. And so I'm hoping that raising them the way I'm raising them without religion is leading, has led to that, but will also help them find their way through the rest of their life of, okay, well, I'm self-reliant, I can figure this out, and be able to call it, a scam for a scam when they see it.
Right. Almost done. My family just walked in. Amanda, any closing remarks or anything you want to promote today, like ProfitCast?
As usual, yes. ProfitCast is on tonight at 9:30. They are on Twitter at ProfitCast and do a Google Hangout similar to this one. So watch that show.
I will advocate for ProfitCast as well. I think it's a great show. I don't always watch it because of the time, but I do try to catch episodes whenever I can or pop on. Nope. Every now and then. I got a milkshake. Yay! Yay! It's 50 degrees and I have a milkshake. So that's it for today. I'm being invaded.
I love it.
Next week, we will be talking to, and Amanda, help me pronounce, is it Scientia? Scientia?
I think so. I think it's, Scientia Perceptum.
He's a biology teacher or something
yes,
like that?
Yes, he's a biologist.
A biologist.
And I believe he has a degree in evolutionary biology,
nice.
As far as I'm aware. I didn't realize it was coming up next week, or I would have had more information on him. But yeah, we've had him on ProfitCast, and he's really smart. We're going to be talking about evolution.
And he prefers to remain anonymous, which is why we're calling him by his Twitter handle. And we will be talking about evolution. So Sunday at 4 o'clock. And thank you so much, Andy, for coming on the show. And if you ever want to come on again, let us know. Any special topics you'd like to address. We always like to have guests back on, especially parents. So.
And maybe when the holidays come back around, we can do one on dealing with holidays in schools.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Well, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see everyone next week. Goodbye.